to the Crooked Table podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. You can find more episodes of this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcatchers. If you can drop us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. This episode, we're talking Saw from 2004, the first of many Saw movies. And I'm honored to welcome to the show Lucy Buglass.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So tell people a little bit about who you are and what you have going on, your blog, Lucy Goes to Hollywood, and where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Lucy Buglass. I'm a film critic from the UK. I set up my own blog called Lucy Goes to Hollywood in, I believe it was 2017. And since then, I've been lucky to have quite a lot of, sort of interest in the blog. I got Rotten Tomatoes approved recently. Very exciting. So
yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much. So I'm really just sort of, sharing my love of film with kind of like-minded fans. I have a specialist like short film column, that kind of thing. I'm just enjoying myself, really. It's at lucygoestohollywood.com. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. So you're really big into horror movies. So when we connected about having you on the show, I think you were pretty much dead set on a horror film. So what is your relationship to the genre? And then we'll talk about the Saw franchise specifically.
Sure. So I've always been into horror. It's kind of my mum's fault. Like, she's massive on the genre. So like as soon as I was old enough, she like showed me all the classics. So I watched Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, all these kind of things. And it was actually Saw that was one of the early ones that she showed me. It was on like a TV show here the TV channel here in the UK. And we put it on and I really enjoyed it. And I just kind of became a little bit obsessed with it since then. Most people will know me as like absolutely loving The Silence of the Lambs. That's my all-time favorite, but Saw has also got a special place in my heart too.
Nice. It's funny. Right before we started the call, I told you I went to the drive-in last night to see the New Mutants. On the other screen behind me was Silence of the Lambs, which
wonderful.
is a movie I love too. So whenever New Mutants was kind of boring, I was like, "What's Clarice up to?" Turn around to see what's going on there.
No, I can watch that so many times and not get bored. Honestly, like it's my absolute favorite.
Yeah, same. It's a great movie. So when did you come across? Well, you said about when you came across the Saw franchise. So what is it about this series of movies? And I have my own take on this that hooks people so much, because we'll talk about how the first one is different from what the sequels became, and how, I feel like the sequels are really where the franchise becomes more what, people would traditionally call like torture porn or whatever. And I don't think if you watch the first one, it's shockingly devoid of most of that. What's your overall thoughts on the franchise and where the sequels went, getting into Hoffman and Amanda and like all that is basically where his apprentices have apprentices. It starts to get really convoluted.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in my personal opinion, I love the first two, and then they kind of start to like dip in quality a little bit, like in my opinion. I loved the first one purely because it was very psychological. It was a very new concept. I think people are very interested in this idea of like, people being tested or punished in some way, or kind of social experiments. That's a big sort of theme in horror films. So that was kind of why the first one did so well, I think, because all the marketing materials was just kind of like, oh, have you seen Saw? And it was like very like ambiguous and weird. And I think since then they've kind of gone down a very brutal kind of in your face, squeamish kind of, route, which is fine. But the first one is very different to the others, I would say. And the second one's good too, but then it just 3 onwards is when it gets like so disgusting, I think, when it really ups the ante in the gore. And I think that, 3 actually has the trap that I felt the most physically sick at.
Oh, which is that now?
It's the pig vat one where the lawyer's kind of chained to the floor and they're kind of like shoving pig guts onto him. Oh, it's horrible.
Oh, God, I forgot about that one.
It's funny because you would have thought that one's not really that gross, because there's not really any blood. There's not really any sort of, cutting anything off. But it's just someone kind of drowning in guts. But it's just, you just look at it and you think, oh, man. Yeah, so I think 3 was when they went, do you know what, let's just really ramp it up and see what we can do. And since then, fans have become used to how far can they push it now, I would say.
Yeah, watching the first one, there's a lot of there's a few game scenarios, but you mostly see them in the past tense, kind of with the the sort of quick editing, like frenetic style that the franchise really embraces going forward. But I was telling my wife, because she saw the second one, she watched this one with me. She'd never seen the first Saw before. She saw the second in theaters, I think, like on a date or with friends or whatever. And I was telling her that the first one has all those game sequences that are like pretty much just flashing back to people like first realizing they're in the situation, and then kind of the aftermath, sort of a Seven approach to the games.
Yes, definitely.
And I was telling her, in the sequels, each of these would be like a 5 to 7 minute sequence of someone trying to figure their way out of it. And the first one doesn't really get into all of that. And it's funny too, because I don't mind gore, but the sequels got so gratuitous, but I kept going back to see them because the psychological aspect that you're mentioning, and also there's like a soap opera element to it where you're like, oh man, I have to find out, where Jill dropped where she was bringing that envelope, or what this is about, or how these people are connected. I think
exactly.
That's a big part of it as well. I would say, just with people that fell in love with the first one, just being like, well, I got to ride this out to at least the first 7.
You've made a really good point there, because you're right. They definitely have overarching sort of themes or, actions that characters do. And you're like, ooh, what's going to happen? And it's, and, especially when they introduced, like you said, Jill, which is John Kramer's wife, obviously like that was big, ex-wife. And yeah, I think with the Amanda and Hoffman thing, I think people were just kind of like curious about how far that would go. I liked Amanda in a sense, but I personally wasn't really a big fan of Hoffman. I kind of wish that they hadn't gone down that route, to be honest. I think Amanda made sense because, she kind of had like the almost like Stockholm syndrome, oh, Jigsaw helped me,
right.
Almost feeling like she owed him that and she wanted to sort of take care of him. Whereas I feel Hoffman was a little bit like tagged on. Do you know what I mean? Like it just didn't really work for me personally.
Right.
Plus I find him really annoying as a character.
Well, I think Amanda's she's in up till 3, right? And then that's it for her.
And then she dies in 3. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why you can tell with 4, spoilers for the Saw franchise, obviously, for this whole episode. But with 4, there's the big twist is that it's running concurrently with 3. And I think that was just so they could buy time and figure out what they're going to do now to keep this franchise alive.
No, exactly.
Since John Kramer's head was cut open at the end of the 3rd one, it's like, all right, so we killed him off. I think maybe initially they were sort of, maybe Leigh Whannell, who I don't know if he wrote all of it. I think he wrote the first 3. Maybe he was being like, we're going to make this a trilogy. And then the studio was like, yeah, no, we want more. And they're like, oh, crap. I guess we have to figure out how to extend this now.
Yeah, 4 onwards is when it starts to really get a little silly, I think. And I think, if you check like, kind of any reviews aggregator or any kind of things like that, you will see a gradual dip in sort of favorability.
Yeah.
Like by the time you get to 7, they're like, come on, guys, like, what are you doing?
Final chapter, promise.
Yeah, like they were like, oh, final chapter. And then it wasn't. Like, hello, we had Jigsaw. But no, I think, it's become like a spectacle. People just want to go and see it like on the big screen. And they've kind of made like amusement parks out of it, because we have one here in England in Thorpe Park. We have Saw the Ride, which is basically this big roller coaster, and then it almost like tips you into like big saw blades, and that's kind of like the thrill of it.
Oh wow!
So it's become so heavily franchised now that I think people, like I say, want it for the spectacle. It rolls around every Halloween, or there's always some event going on around it, and it's endearing to a sense. But I do think that the first 3 had the most substance in terms of like narrative. And then it gets a bit silly after that.
No wonder you kind of lost interest a little bit in the latter half, because it was really then the Hoffman show. And it was just like he was essentially the lead, and the whole thing was him pushing the boundaries and just being really sadistic and not even giving people a way out of the game, and not even really teaching lessons, and just being like, this is a fun game. I just like kidnap people and then kill them. And that's like my thing on the side. And it becomes really about that. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the first 3 really established something different in the genre. And after that, it just kind of loses a little bit. I'm a mild defender of 6. I think 6 is where that sort of macabre sense of humor and the kind of social commentary of the genre, or the potential of the genre. I think it crystallizes better than any of the other sequels, because there is the whole angle of the health insurance salesman that denied John Kramer coverage. And so I think that's kind of interesting. But yeah, 4, 5, and 7 are easily, I think, the weakest of the main 7. And I mentioned to you right before the call that I hadn't seen Jigsaw, and you were basically like, don't bother. So what is the point of that movie, I guess, is my question.
Oh my gosh, no, I've kind of blocked that out of my mind, if I'm honest. It's just...
I think most people did.
Such a cash grab, and I think I didn't really get it because, like, again, they tried to push the boundaries of what they did with the special effects, but there was kind of like one, and if listeners have seen this particular scene, they'll know what I mean. Like, there's this kind of big sort of twist at the end, and there's this ridiculous trap that just... The special effects are so bad that I laughed in the cinema, so people probably think I'm an absolute psychopath, but it was just because it was so unbelievable, and I just think they were like, oh... let's just revive it for the hell of it, and we're not even going to call it Saw 9 or whatever it was, or 8. We're going to call it Jigsaw, and it's like, come on, guys, like you've just really ran out of ideas now. So I can't really speak very favorably of it, and I can't really remember the narrative, if I'm quite honest, because I just kind of, I don't own a copy. I have all 7 of them except that, because I just don't care. And I think most Saw fans like panned it. They were like, this is awful. Like, what were you doing? Once again, Tobin Bell, who plays John Kramer, like, he's in it for a split second, and like, if it wasn't for him, it would just be crap. I think he can save any Saw film, because as an actor, he's fantastic. I love him. I think he makes the franchise, if I'm honest.
Yeah, no, I do too. And I think that's part of probably why the sequels fell off, because he's in it less and less, because he dies at the end of 3. But I think his performance, his voice alone.
Oh God, I know.
Yeah, he did. I used to watch The Flash on the CW, and he voiced a villain for like the first half of a season or something. Wow. And that just brought like a new level of gravitas to the CW. But his performance in these movies, which is, like I said, mostly a voice performance, easily puts him in the pantheon of the big horror icons, the Freddys, the Jasons, the Michael Myers and stuff.
Oh, 100%.
And I think, like you said, I think that really comes down to his performance. If you had a lesser actor in that role, I think I don't think it would be nearly as compelling. You need to not necessarily sympathize with Jigsaw, obviously, because what he's doing is obviously screwed up, but you need to understand him and sort of understand, like, in his perverse mind that where he's coming from, that he thinks he's like sort of a missionary of sorts.
Yeah, he does. And I think, in terms of, if we're going to look at sort of villain motives and like serial killer motives, I would argue that his is probably one of the strongest in terms of how he feels like he's been, wronged by the world around him. And he's like, oh, well, I've been a hardworking, law-abiding citizen. Why did I deserve this? And it's, it's the big argument about, you guys are messing around and doing horrible things to each other and yourselves. Why do you deserve life? That's kind of his ethos almost. He wants to challenge that. He wants to go, oh, well, I'm going to give you a second chance, almost like a rebirth, like a redemption, in his own twisted mind. And I think, in some ways we are encouraged to sympathize with him in a very uncomfortable way, because if you look at things like, I believe it's in Saw 4 when you find out that they lost the baby. I think that's
I think so.
Scene. Yeah. So, you do start to feel sorry for him, to be honest, but you feel uncomfortable because you're like, you shouldn't be doing this, but I'm sorry about what happened to you, And you're right about his voice. I think his voice alone, especially in the first film, because you have that, that wonderful big reveal, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Oh, yeah. So you don't see him really in the film. It's only in Saw 2 when he really, he sat there like talking to the detective. You don't really see him in the first film. So the fact that he managed to captivate audiences with just his voice is wonderful. It really is.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into talking about the first film, because it does play so much like a mystery or a procedural kind of mashed together with the slasher movie in a way. So let's transition into our discussion of the first Saw movie from 2004. Here's a little bit of the trailer right now.
Hello, madam. Dr. Gordon. I want to play a game.
The Jigsaw Killer.
Paul, find the path through the razor wire.
Technically speaking, he's not really a murderer. He never killed anyone.
Dr. Gordon, your aim in this game is to kill Adam. If you do not, then Diana will die.
He finds ways for his victims to kill themselves.
I'm sick of people who don't appreciate their blessings. I've given you a life purpose.
Looks like our friend Jigsaw likes to book himself front row seats to his own sick games.
He doesn't want us to cut through our chains. He wants us to cut through our feet.
Most people are so ungrateful to be alive. Not anymore.
That was a little bit of the trailer for Saw from 2004, directed by James Wan. And this was obviously the beginning of James Wan's directorial career and features. This was the beginning of his partnership with Leigh Whannell, who's now directing his own movies. Like, so much. Like, without Saw, we wouldn't have The Conjuring, we wouldn't have Insidious, we wouldn't have Upgrade, The Invisible Man, like all these sort of offshoots that really developed from that core friendship and that partnership that the two men have. So what do you think, what is it about either Wan or Whannell that you think they bring to the genre that has really made their work stand out over the last, I guess, 16 years?
I think they're both very unique. And it's funny you should mention Upgrade, because I only watched that recently. And I was completely blown away because it was very different to everything else that Leigh Whannell's done. Mm-hmm. But it was like, futuristic sci-fi and just the sort of the very physical way the actor sort of, moved. And it was a masterpiece. I absolutely loved it. But it's very different from his earlier stuff, and, especially Saw, which he starred in as well. And I just think I'm really in awe of how they've worked together and both worked together and improved over the past few years. The quality of their work, in my opinion, has got better, which is great.
Yeah.
And then you have James Wan, and obviously he's created like The Conjuring, which I think is absolutely terrifying. And he did, all the Annabelle spin-offs, and she's creepy. and I just think that they've got such a unique voice. And, every horror fan, you'll name them and they'll be like, oh yeah, we know those guys, and I think it's because of Saw. But what they did was they thought of new and unique ideas. And yes, The Conjuring was franchised and so was Insidious. But, Saw, it was very different to the rest of their stuff. So it was nice to see them try new things, kind of embrace horror on a different level, both supernatural and the real human horror. And yeah, I've loved it. I've loved watching their work grow.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point now that James Wan is the guy behind Aquaman, and he directed a Fast and Furious movie. Like, he's a blockbuster director now, and that's crazy.
Yes, because I'm not that big on superhero films, but I did give it a watch.
Yeah,
I thought it was a decent film. Yeah, it was all right.
Yeah, it's total, obviously, again, totally different than the $1.2 million budget it Saw, when you have like CG octopus playing drums and all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah, just a testament to, I think, their talents and how they've sort of blown up over the last 15 years. And Leigh Whannell's only directed, I think, 3 features. One of the Insidious sequels, Upgrade, and then The Invisible Man. So I want to speak to, let's see, I mentioned the balance of procedural and slasher elements. So what I love about this movie is that right from the beginning, it starts with something, there's something primal about waking up and having no idea where you are. So like right from the very first frame, which, by the way, gives away the fact that the key was down the drain. I think people always forget that. The what?
I always love that. On a rewatch, I'm always like, ooh.
He gave away literally the key to their escape right there. And nobody sees it. So we wake up in the now iconic bathroom, which shows up in, I think, at least 2 or 3 of the sequels, sporadically. What is it about? I guess I really love this opening because we are thrust in the same situation as Dr. Lawrence Gordon and Adam. Now, we have no idea what the hell's going on. They're in like the nastiest bathroom of all time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But this whole, like, that set has become so iconic that, of course, at the end of Saw: The Final Chapter, not really the final chapter, they should call it, that we end up right back there.
Yes.
What is it about that set and like this sequence? It feels like we spend probably 2/3 or at least half the runtime in a bathroom, which from a filmmaking perspective is genius, because all you need is 2 actors in a nasty room, and you can make a movie. I think that's something different also that none of the sequels really gets, because they really take you way more into the world, and there's a sense of isolation that the first movie that is unique to the first film.
Yeah, totally. I think it plays on the sort of the one location element of horror. Obviously I appreciate, you have scenes in, the hospital and scenes in like Dr. Gordon's house and scenes in the police station. But you're right, for the most part, it's in this horrible bathroom. And I think you're right. It's a sense of entrapment. But not only that, you're trapped in this horrible, unsanitary, weird location. Like, you can almost like smell how horrible it is. Like when you kind of, your senses, you watch it and you're like, oh, geez, not the kind of place you'd want to be. And it's almost like humiliating to the characters to have them chained to pipes in this disgusting bathroom, and they're just sort of freaking out. And there's that weird sense of like voyeurism watching them like try to figure out what they're doing. And I think a lot of horror fans are very interested in sort of the human condition and watching people in sort of social experiments. And I am too. I think that's really interesting. And I just think the bathroom now, like you say, has become so iconic because it's so disgusting, it's horrible, and it's where Lawrence obviously cuts his foot off in one of the most horrible scenes in the entire film. But no, I think as a set, I absolutely love it. I just think it's so cool, so gross, and if I could visit it, I would like to.
I think
I would like to see it, but I wouldn't want to get stuck there.
Yeah, you don't want to use the facilities.
No.
I'm in Florida, and here at Universal Studios, they've done, Halloween Horror Nights, and they've had, I saw it as one of the, I haven't gone because I just haven't gotten a chance to, but they have had, I think, a Saw haunted house, and I'm pretty sure the bathroom was part of that. So people they have recreated it in real life.
Oh, wow. I would love to see that. I'm not sure if in real life I'd have the guts to go in though, because I assume they'd have like scare actors and stuff. I probably wouldn't be able to do it. But
and they really play up the nastiness of the room too. There's a scene where Adam has to like look in the toilet for something and then checks the back. It's like, I wish I'd checked there first. There's something about Whannell has sort of the dark sense of humor that I think leaks through this movie in certain spots as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, his character starts off as being very sarcastic, very sort of jokey. I think he says something about like, oh, can you see any scars? Have they taken my kidneys or something? Mm-hmm. And then Lawrence is like, oh, if your kidneys weren't there, you'd be in agony or you'd be dead. Trust me, I know, or something. So there's there's a very different dynamic between the two men. One's very cold and clinical, and one's a lot more animated, hysterical, and sarcastic. And I think Cary Elwes and Leigh Whannell really kind of bounce off each other, and I love their interactions. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, I do too. And it occurred to me, you mentioned the voyeurism aspect of the movie, and I feel like that's something that the sequels include but not emphasize as much. There's a line in here that obviously it's revealed later in the movie that Adam was watching Dr. Gordon at the behest of we find out Detective Tapp, which we'll get into more later. But there's a line where he talks about like what I saw, blah blah blah, whatever. And I maybe I'm dense for not getting this, but that never occurred to me, the double meaning of Saw, as in something you witnessed, and also Jigsaw Killer, and also the saw that he cuts his hand. Like it works on multiple levels, and I never connected the voyeurism aspect to the title. Is that something that you've known from the get-go? Am I just dense, or what's the deal there?
Do you know what? Like, that's blown my mind because I knew that it was a voyeurism thing, but then you've said that Saw could be a double meaning. You're absolutely right. I never considered that.
Yeah,
I love that. I'm going to pretend I came up with that now.
There you go. You're welcome. You're welcome to take that.
But then people listen to the podcast and I'll be exposed, so I won't do that.
That's true. Yeah.
But no, I think you're right. Certainly, the title of Saw in itself, a slight diversion, but it's a very strange meaning. Like what does it mean? Like you're watching people. There's a saw on the floor. He's called Jigsaw. It's a very interesting title. I think so.
Yeah. Yes.
It's part of the appeal.
I love that aspect of it too, that there's real intelligence behind this story that on its face, a lot of people I think dismiss this one as they do the sequels, and being like we sort of mentioned torture porn, or like, oh, that's just a bunch of gore and there's not really a story or whatever to it. I think this movie proves them wrong. I think the sequels, maybe increasingly prove them right as they go on. By the time you get to 7, you're just like, I don't even know what's happening, but there's like a bunch of blood splattering everywhere. But sure, let's do that. The big selling point, I think, for me, for a lot of people with 7 was the return of Carrie Elways, which I feel like we should mention that in a second. But there's something about this one with the bathroom element that I feel like, is this sort of the original escape room? Because now, I don't know if it's like that in the UK, but in the US here, every plaza, like every like shopping center plaza where there's like, restaurants and shops and things like, there's an escape room everywhere. There's so many of them. You can buy Groupons to go in an escape room. And I feel like this movie started that trend, because I don't think I was really familiar with that as a phenomenon until like the last few years.
No, we've certainly jumped on it as well. You can sort of like book sort of, different themed escape rooms, whether it's like horror or sci-fi or whatever it is. And I'm not quite sure where the trend has come from, if I'm honest. I know we had the escape room movie that came out a few months ago. Yes. Which wasn't the best, but but I think you're right that this idea of someone having to get out of a place is kind of being birthed by Saw in a way. And obviously kind of escape is futile at this point, because as we know, upon rewatching, that key is gone now. So, you can't get out. And, you're spending a lot of the film looking at the Saw thinking this is not for the chains, is it?
Oh, I love that line.
Yeah. Oh God.
That's a classic line. He wants us to cut through our feet.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the moral conundrum, the sort of the life lessons that Jigsaw is teaching people. It's like, okay, you want, most people are so ungrateful to be alive. He says, like, how much are you willing to put yourself through in order to survive? How much are you willing to suffer to learn that lesson so that you can, survive and go on with your life? And I guess be recruited as one of my apprentices is kind of his thing. But yeah, I love that aspect of it, because it puts you in, it's the classic after movie conversation. Like, I don't know, what would you do? What would you do if you were put in that situation? Would you have the guts to cut through your feet, or would you just be like, I'm going to hang out here and try and find an escape, even though like time is a factor as well. So I really, there's that, the psychological aspect of it. It's basically half a kind of CSI episode. When we bounce out of the bathroom and we have Danny Glover and Ken Leung sorting through the mystery of Jigsaw. Let's talk a little bit about that side of it and how much more interesting the cop side is in this one compared to the other ones. Is that just because it's Danny Glover? What is it about the cop side that makes it, I think, more compelling this time around?
I think it's compelling because there's clearly a lot of sort of backstory and detective tap, in the sense that he's become obsessed with this case now to an unhealthy level. And it's about sort of, the disgruntled cop that like really wants to track down this killer, but hasn't got a clue who he is. And it's, it focuses more on why the cop's interested in Jigsaw rather than, oh, this is the law and we kind of have to do our job, he's got like a personal sort of vendetta against this guy. I think you're right. It kind of plays like a sort of really gritty CSI episode or some kind of like crime drama rather than a straight up horror. Yeah. Which is very different from the others because there's not a lot of gore comparatively to the others. I mean, you do have certain, bits, like you say, the really fast cutting when you see the guy, I've completely forgotten names, but the guy who has to, kind of go through the razor maze to try and find things, but what's happened, but you don't see it. Right. And I think it was just cool having the context behind the cops and why they had such a deep interest in Jigsaw. Yeah, this one's... I don't just Danny Glover, yes, like you said. So
that helps, it helps. This one's a lot more about the people than the carnage. I think the only shot that we really get that I kind of warned my wife about, because she's not really into the gore stuff or even horror generally, and except for when I'm like, let's watch this one. She's like, okay. Is the intestines shot, the part with Amanda where she's kind of digging through to find the key. That's really the only shot that's extremely, that's even moderately graphic, I'd say, because everything else happens so fast that you don't see the detail. or it's like even the obviously the famous foot slicing scene. You sort of see him blood kind of starts to pour out, and then you cut away, and then it's just all Leigh Whannell screaming. It's very much reminded me of something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that way, that you're like, oh my gosh, it's so violent, it's so graphic, or Psycho, but you don't really see any of that on screen. It's all implied, and in a way that I feel like that makes it scarier, because you kind of imagine how visceral that really is.
Yeah, I agree. I think, if they just straight up showed the foot cutting, I don't think it would be as intense. But you say, you cut from Leigh Whannell screaming, and suddenly he's, the more caring one doesn't want him to do that. And, Dr. Gordon's become a lot more unhinged. And, you kind of got the close up of like his face, and like, he's kind of biting onto his shirt thing that he's ripped off, and he's screaming and he's got blood everywhere. And I think it's the implication that's the scary thing, like you say, because your brain naturally takes you to, oh God, it puts images in your head. And I think that's where the other saws are lacking. They don't allow the audience to make up their own mind about what's going on, because when I first watched that scene, my brain was like, oh man, I can imagine what that looks like. And I think, it's just a much more effective way of doing it.
I agree. I wanted to go back to Detective Tapp for a second too, because we were talking about how he obsesses over the case. You get a little bit of a surprise throat slit, which reminded me very much of The Invisible Man, where there's a very pivotal moment there, which I don't want to give away for people. That played similarly. I think The Invisible Man was slightly more effective just because it does come out of nowhere. And then the direct aftermath, which that's a movie I love. That's absolutely one of my favorite movies of the year. And I think Elizabeth Moss should be in the awards conversation. Whether that will happen, I mean, we're in the fall and there's been very few movies released, so maybe I'd say she has a better chance now. But I love the part with the Detective Tapp storyline, that the timeline is a little bit nebulous on purpose, that you don't really understand that he's a disgraced cop and all that until later on when Gordon is filling us in, because we just get highlights and we don't realize. It's a little bit of the trick that they play later on in a more massive scale with Soft War, where you don't realize how the timeline is playing out exactly. And you think that maybe this is more concurrent than it actually is. And it's like, oh no, he got disgraced. He was abandoned from he left the police force. Like, he's like kind of on his own thing, like with a vendetta against Jigsaw now. He's hiring Adam to go and follow Gordon around and prove that he is Jigsaw because he's like fixated on it. So I love that this franchise and this movie obviously establishes that it's constantly toying with our expectations on when what we're seeing is actually happening.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very clever. And I think when you find out how the two men are connected, like you said, Adam was paid to take pictures of Gordon, and Gordon was having an affair with the secretary. Medical student. I think it was medical student. Anyway, it was somebody that you work with.
Right.
But the point is, like, Adam, when the truth comes out, I think Gordon is very, very hurt by this because he's aware of who Tapp is. And he's aware of Tapp's obsession with him. We see a scene when he comes into the office and like interrogates him about it, and he's like, "Is this your pen? Like your pen light?" And it just becomes, he almost just wants to close the case, I think, for his own sanity. He's way off. He's way off, and I think you do have certain shots of John Kramer in hospital as well, which obviously when you realize that it's him, you're like, oh man. But yeah, there's a lot of clever reveals in the first Saw, which I think a lot of people forget about.
The big reveal at the end, of course, of the body being John Kramer and that whole thing. Like, I had mentioned to my wife that what the twist was, because I was like, you don't like these movies, you're never going to see it. She knew that was the twist at the end, but then the storytelling in the movie is so good and so makes such a case for Zepp being played by Michael Emerson from Lost. That they make such a case that he is actually Jigsaw, that my wife was watching it and like in the last act she's like, oh well, I guess they must have recast for the sequels or something. That I'm like just sitting there tight-lipped waiting for John Kramer to stand up in that bathroom. And I think that's a testament to how engrossing the story is and how meticulously crafted and laid out it all is. The fact that my wife, who knew the ending, forgot the end, like was convinced by the movie that she had the wrong ending, just because of the different twists and turns and misdirects.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that was a massive reveal for me. And obviously, I didn't know that reveal was going to happen. The supposed dead body.
Yeah, no, neither did I. I saw the first one, I think it's probably soon after the second one was out, because the second one was a much bigger deal. Obviously, the first one was kind of the breakthrough. And then the sequel, I think, is still the highest grossing one in the franchise. So once that came out and everybody was talking about this franchise, I was like, well, I guess I should watch the first one. So I rented the first one on, I guess, DVD at that point. And yeah, so I was totally blown away. I mean, it's a complete game changer for the genre. And even watching it now, I got chills at the final scene when he stands up. And I think the Charlie Clouser score is a big part of that.
Oh, it's so good. Yes. Such a good moment.
His music contributes so much to this whole franchise, really, but obviously particularly that big reveal at the end. I think we have to talk about the Amanda part of it as well, because essentially the movie is based on a short film from 2003, also titled Saw, where it sounds like it's basically Amanda's story kind of pulled as a standalone. I think it was a male character at that point, but it sounds like they basically integrated that into this movie, which would explain why Amanda's game is the one that we see the most of. But it also establishes so much, like it's so hugely pivotal for everything that comes next, not only in the second one where she's revealed to be the apprentice, but also the reverse bear trap, which becomes again another piece of iconography from this franchise. So let's talk about the Amanda sequence a little bit.
Yeah, off the back of the fact that it was a short film, I believe it was Leigh Whannell's like playing a character, and I can't remember if it was called Adam or not, but he was the one that had the trap originally.
Okay, there you go.
And then obviously they decided to make it Amanda. And I think that sort of contraption, when you first see it, is like the most, oh my God thing, like what on earth is this? And again, it's a great use of implying but not showing, because obviously, as we know, Amanda gets it off her head, but Jigsaw demonstrates what would happen if she didn't. And it's kind of, your brain goes, oh no, it's called a reverse bear trap for a reason. It would literally rip your skull open.
Right.
And, again, it puts the horrible image in your head. And we don't see it in use until, I think, which film is it?
6. We see it at the end of 6, but Hoffman gets out of it sort of at the last second, and he just gets like part of his mouth ripped. And then 7 is when Jill does not escape.
That's it, yeah. But there's been that many films like between then where we haven't actually seen it in action, and I'm kind of divided on that, because I'm like, did I want to see it, or did I want it to be like implied for the rest of the franchise? But I guess they had to bring it back.
Well, that's the difference between the first one and the sequels. Like you said, they don't leave anything to the imagination in the sequels. They're just like, it's like, oh, you want pig guts? Here you go. You want to see people's like twisted, or like there's also in the third one, there's the one that really sticks out in my mind too is that guy that's on the rack, and it's just like twisting an arm, twisting a leg, twisting it. I'm like, oh my God, like really, dude? There's so much of that. It gets to be. Yeah, it gets to be it's not even scary at that point. It's just disturbing to watch, and seemingly with no real, point. No real, like, there's no reason behind it. It's just for shock value's sake, I guess. And I feel in the first one, they use it, they use it sparingly enough that when you do see something, it is horrific. And like you said, they don't go out of their way to focus on the details, because anything that we imagine is going to be more horrific. Plus, there's the element that this movie establishes that he's the Jigsaw killer, but technically he's never really killed anyone. So you have that other aspect that makes him different from your Freddys and Jasons and Michael Myers and Leatherfaces and all of them. That he's just putting you in a situation. He just sets you up. He's like, this is what you have to do if you want to live. Choice 1, you do this, whatever horrific thing it is to yourself, clawing through your eyes or whatever, so you can get this key, so whatever, so you can live and be grateful that you're alive without your limb or whatever part of you had to sacrifice, or you let it rip you apart, and then I guess you didn't really want to be in life in the first place. Is how he sees it. So he's like, I just put him in the situation. From there, it's up to them what happens.
Yeah, of course. I think he says something very similar to that in Saw 2. He says something like, I never killed anyone, like, they made the choice, or something like that. And I think, it's a real example of sort of this, because you are sort of encouraged to feel sorry for Amanda. Yes, she was a drug user, and yes, she was, what Jigsaw considered to be ungrateful, or whatever it was. And, she's very traumatized by what's happened to her, but she's also weirdly grateful because she keeps saying, he helped me. Mm-hmm. And that's a very, like, not only has Jigsaw, like, forced her to, stab a guy in the guts and get this key out of him while he's still alive, but, he's also broken her mind in the sense that she now believes that what he's doing is a moral thing. And I think the psychological damage is as bad as the physical, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because Amanda, she becomes awful, like when we see her again in the third film. She's very, very psychopathic in the third film. But in a way, you're kind of like, it's not your fault you're like this. You were conditioned to be like this. Mm-hmm. And I think she's a very, very interesting character in the first. The first film does it well when it kind of splices the reverse bear trap scene with her sort of police interrogation, because it makes it more human. Like you were saying earlier, like sometimes the characters exist to just be ripped up, whereas I think Amanda had a lot of substance behind her. Yeah,
she contributes a lot to us understanding the motive of Jigsaw, the goal, what his real objective is. Like if he had it his way, all of his survivors would be like Amanda. They would have that same kind of attitude. And yes, there's a certain level of psychological damage there, but he's coming from such a place of moral superiority that he was diagnosed with inoperable cancer, and so his thing is teaching people how to appreciate being alive, right? So because of that, he feels like he's on a high horse, that he can see Dr. Gordon struggling with his marriage, and it's unclear if he has an affair, because he says that he didn't. He got to that point where he was meeting her, and then he was like, I can't do this or whatever. But and I think that also so the movie can split our sympathies between Dr. Gordon and also understanding Jigsaw's game, or the point of Jigsaw's game. But he's also making these moral judgments on people who are struggling, just trying to do the best they can, just trying to cope. And there's that element of it too, where you're like, well, who the hell why are you get to judge other people? Yeah, this is what he's doing. It's not right, but it's not he's basically playing God. And that's a very dangerous route to take. On the one hand, he believes he's doing, he calls it his work, I think, in the sequels. Yeah. But on the other hand, it's like, well, that's not your place to teach people things. It's a very murky and yet fascinating psychology behind the character, and like you said, much more than a lot of the other slasher villains or horror icons. And I think it works best when there are characters that we actually spend time with and get to know and understand, instead of, the sequels where it's just like, oh, this is a random person. You did this thing, and now you're going to pay. And we're just like, okay, sure. I guess this is what we're doing.
Yeah, certainly the first, again, I would say the first three encourage the audience to sort of make their own mind up about the character. And it's like, right, almost like you're the one making judgment. You kind of think, I think the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, Dr. Gordon's scum, whatever, blah, blah. But then I've kind of like sat on it and I've thought, obviously I don't condone affairs at all, but, right, but you're right. We don't know if he did that. We don't know if he got there and thought it was a mistake, or if something else had happened. We don't know the full story. We're just making judgment based on what Jigsaw has sort of given us. And it's the same with Adam. Like, Adam is described as like a bottom feeder and whatever, but we don't really fully understand Adam's character. So like you said, who are we to fully judge what they're doing? And it puts you in a very uncomfortable position where you're sort of like, do you really deserve this, man? I mean, we all make mistakes. I've made mistakes. Do I deserve, that? It's sort of, you almost rank Jigsaw's victims and how much they deserved it, I find. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, especially later on when we have the bare minimum information to go on. Mm-hmm. And you're right. The movies do, this one especially does make you sort of weirdly complicit in what's going on. And it speaks to
the dark side of human nature. That's kind of what horror movies do best, right? Shedding a light on the like fucked up little corners of everybody's mind and the way we act and the way we see things and how that could be twisted and perverted enough to change somebody's outlook to think that they can teach people life lessons by putting them in these horrific situations. And that's kind of a thing that runs through the movies, that nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. I mean, Tap has the whole, the line where he's talking to Gordon and dropping off at his home, I think. And he says something like, the sewer lines run under this neighborhood too, doctor, which again is sort of a, we've all got secrets, we've all got darkness and that kind of thing. And I love that element of it too, because it makes you see things in a little bit of a different light.
Mm-hmm. And I think, if I remember correctly, Dr. Gordon does show a little bit of contempt towards Tap because he is a medical intern as well, I believe. Or no, he's an orderly. He works in the hospital. And I don't think Dr. Gordon treated him with much respect. So Tap kind of has a little bit of a vendetta against, sorry, not Tap.
Zep, yeah.
Zep, sorry, yes. He has a bit of a vendetta against him also. So, but there's a lot of complex relationships going on here in terms of sort of who blames who for what and who's related to who in what sense, and it's a very clever web of sort of blaming and relationships and that kind of thing.
And especially in the bathroom itself, that relationship sort of evolves from, who are you? How did we get here? Oh, we're both in this situation. I woke up at the same as you, blah, blah, blah. We need to work together. And then the sort of mistrust that Jigsaw sort of instigates with the, don't believe Adam's lies. And Adam keeps the photo and hides it. And, he has all of the photos that he took that were planted in the back of the toilet, all that stuff. Like he turns them against each other. Yeah. And test them to the point that, at one point he tries, and I'd forgotten about this angle. He tries to, considering poisoning Adam, and then instead sort of plays it off as like, look, I did it. I killed him, with the poisoned cigarette. And then of course the electrocution, which again, sort of that dark sense of humor that I feel like Leigh Whannell brings to it. It's like, and he's like, what did you do?
Yeah.
He's like, I got electrocuted. It's like that. It's got like sort of a literal jolt of memory, even though we know obviously he's been lying from the beginning. That's when it starts to come out. He's like, I know who you are. I followed you and all that. Their relationship, I think, is really interesting in that it's the sinner and the person who's basically exposing his sins. And I love that sort of cause and effect, like the sort of consequences that Gordon is facing in that moment.
Yeah, and you're right about their relationship. It's very turbulent, and obviously they start to blame each other and get very aggressive. And obviously their kind of mistrust for each other, teamed with Gordon's inability to eventually reach the phone that he's provided with to contact his family, is the catalyst for what happens. And I think both actors play it very well, because you would start to, distrust the person you're with. You're like, well, you've been taking pictures of me, so like, how can I trust you? And who the hell are you? And, obviously that's what Jigsaw wanted. He wanted to see how they would respond. They're like lab rats, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. And I think there are moments in Elway's and Whannell's performances that are a little bit rough. I think you can tell certain moments where Whannell or Elway's like doesn't quite sell the moment. I don't think Elway's is as good at playing distraught, or like, when he finds the pictures and he's like sad and upset about his family. I don't think he plays that nearly as well. But one of the things that I've seen is some people critiquing his acting in his last scene when his leg has been cut off and he's like, I have to go save my family, that kind of thing. I actually think it's great acting because he's supposed to be in shock. He's literally bleeding all over the place. Mm-hmm. And he's, how like pale his face gets. And I think that's very, it's a very intense is not a strong enough word for it. It's a very intense moment though. That he finally snaps and shoots Adam, and we didn't really talk too much about the kidnapping aspect. You sort of mentioned it, that his wife and daughter were kidnapped, and we see flashbacks to his interactions with them. And I like also just jumping back for that for a second. There's that moment where he's putting his daughter to bed, and he's doing work, and his daughter's like, "Oh, I had a bad, there's a man in my room," that kind of thing. And the movie sets it up that he's gonna be like, "Oh, I'm busy, go away," that kind of thing. And he's gonna be like, "I feel so bad, I ignored my daughter." And instead, it continues. He closes his laptop. He's like, "And I'm done. Let's go." And he's like being a good dad. So again, to sort of put you on his side, the movie messes with you as far as what your allegiance is going to be, and like you said, how you're seeing these people. Like if you are hoping that they're going to get out of there, or if you're like, no, this guy is a bottom feeder, or this guy is a cheat and a terrible person. It sort of switches back and forth on you, so that you never really know 100% where you stand until the end. Yeah,
definitely, and It's good that you mentioned the performance when he's sort of, like he's cut his foot off and, shot Adam, because that scene's very pivotal for me, because, they're kind of almost weirdly like embracing each other, and Adam's like, "Don't leave me." Yeah. And then it's like, I have to get help. And then they're crying. And that's such a humanizing moment, because you realize in that moment that these people are at their most vulnerable. They're clueless. They don't know what they're going to do. And they've spent all this time heckling each other, and now they're crying at each other and being like, "Please don't leave me." And it's a really heartbreaking scene. Actually, I think it was played really well.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. We didn't even mention so far the Jigsaw puppet, which is.
Oh, how do we've got to 54 minutes and I haven't mentioned it.
I know. I'm as impressed as you are. The puppet obviously is like the for lack of a better term, face of Jigsaw. We have the Michael Myers mask, and all these people have their their image. That's the Jigsaw image, and it's the little puppet on the tricycle. There's something just creepy about puppets, I guess. First of all, but the fact that not only is it a puppet, but it's like it's a puppet on a tricycle, not unlike the one my daughter has, except smaller, obviously. I love that. I love that is the way that he kind of communicates with his victims, is the puppets. And I think that there's even an explanation for the puppets in one of the sequels. I forget. I think there is something where he comes across the puppet and you're like, oh, that's how he got the puppet or something.
Oh, yes. So he made it for his unborn child, which is terrifying when you think about it.
That's
look
worse.
At it.
That's
no, thank you. Like, it's horrible. And I think he called it Billy or something.
Yeah, that's right.
But yes, when you find out it was supposed to be a child's toy, I was like, my God, this is horrible.
That's even darker than I remember. Yeah. And then, so there's the puppets. We mentioned the reverse bear trap. I'm just trying to think of like all the like hallmarks of this franchise. The reverse bear trap, obviously Tobin Bell, the puppets, and the pig masks, which again are really freaky and impressive in a startling way. I don't think there's any like hidden origin story for the pig masks, but that's essentially what his followers wear throughout the franchise.
I think, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to go back in the sequels in my head. His first victim he pursued on Chinese New Year, and it was the year of the pig, I believe.
Okay.
So we'd picked up a mask from a stall to like apprehend him, I think. It was.
Of course, they covered that. It's 8 movies. They had to get there eventually.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, I know, because they had to be like, oh, well, let's just explain the pig. Some filler there. But it's creepy without an explanation, though, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the pig mask is creepy without the explanation. I think the puppet is creepier with the explanation. And also, I mean, there's something so specific about that puppet. You're like, there has to be some kind of intentionality there. He doesn't just walk in and be like, yeah, I want that puppet with the spirals on its cheeks. So let's see. We mentioned the performances. We mentioned I like that Detective Tapp is Danny Glover playing a cop again, and he's still too old for this shit, with like sort of a Lethal Weapon thing going on.
Yeah.
So I thought that was funny. The fact when time is up and Zepp goes in there to kill Gordon's family, and we got Monica Potter, who is huge in Hollywood for like 2 years, right? That overlapped with this movie's release. That she's manages to escape, so that character finally has a little bit of agency. There's not really any female presence in this movie, minus Gordon's wife and daughter, unfortunately. I guess Amanda, but she's only in like the one scene, really.
Yeah, you're definitely right. And I think, I liked how they used Amanda later on, because she was a very surprising antagonist, I think. But yeah, it's a very male dominated sort of film, isn't it? In terms of it's pitting men against each other and angry male detective, but that doesn't bother me too much. I think in terms of the context of the film, it did make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it feeds into the whole masculinity and pride and all that, exactly. The ego and that kind of thing. I do think it's interesting that, and my wife actually pointed this out when we were watching it, that Amanda is I believe the only woman we see in a game in this movie, and also the only one to escape, except for Gordon.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know if that's maybe Juan and Whannell were like, maybe we should make the woman that the character that escapes a woman. So that, I don't know, maybe they're like, it's more upsetting for viewers if it's a woman that gets killed by this man. I'm not sure exactly what their rationale is, but clearly by the sequels, they don't give a shit. Because it's just like, they're like, all right, we've got a built-in audience now. Let's just go for it. Because then, all hell breaks loose in the other ones. And so then we have that big confrontation culminating in Gordon slicing his leg off and I guess crawling out. That's the other thing too. Then I love the other movies explain. I think it's the last one or 7 maybe explains it that he cauterized his leg, because you're watching the movie and there's a certain futility that makes his story even more tragic. That you're watching this dude who's completely drained of life on his face, and his foot is sitting in the corner, which again you see kind of shriveled up in 7. I actually watched the YouTube clip for the very last scene in 7 to sort of refresh that. You see, he looks over and sees his shriveled foot's kind of sitting there near the chain, because it's been there for years at that point. And you're watching him he's like, I'm going to go get help. And as a viewer, you're thinking to yourself, I don't really think you're going to get very far. It's like, you're going to make it, especially you're going to be crawling while blood is a trail of blood leaving behind you. I don't know how that would work, but then they do explain that in 7 that he got cauterized his leg on a steel beam or whatever, a steel pipe, and then Jigsaw sort of retrofitted him and recruited him and stuff. So were you one of the many Saw fans like me who were kind of always wondering if they were going to bring Gordon back, or did you sort of hope that they would just leave it alone at that point?
Yeah, because I think he's one of my favorite characters in the sense that, his story was such an integral part of the first film. And like you say, there's that kind of silly, almost, how is he going to crawl for help? Where did he go? What are the logistics of this bathroom? Where exactly is he? And I think a lot of fans, us included, wanted to know what happened to him. And, I'm a little disappointed they did wait till 7. I don't know if it was, something to do with Carey's schedule or something. I'm not quite sure why they left it that long. But it was really cool to see him back. And especially what he does to Hoffman is the best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that dramatic moment when he locks Hoffman in there and throws the saw out so he can't use it. And you're like, yes. And it's an amazing moment, and it was very fitting that Gordon was the one to do it, I think.
Yeah, now he picks up the saw and he kind of kicks it away from him, picks it up and throws it out. And of course, the movie was also Saw 3D, so he throws it out directly at the camera, sort of in slow motion, swinging towards the camera. And he's like, I don't think so. And then he's the one that says game over. I love that.
So good.
That was I don't particularly care for 7 very much as a movie, but all the Gordon stuff is basically the highlight of it, I would say.
I think, 7 was all right. I think, is a guy called Bobby Gordon the guy who lies about being tested by him, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
All about him, and it's sort of I've written a memoir about me escaping Jigsaw, and it's kind of bleeding heart,
Right.
And I almost like the kind of twisted sort of comeuppance, you survived this trip, this trap, huh? So let me put you in it and see if you can survive it.
Right, exactly.
I like that aspect of it. But you're right, the rest of it was just filler, and it was a bit unnecessary. There's
that support group for Jigsaw survivors that I think that includes Gordon, but I believe there's a couple other people from previous movies in there too. So
I hate that scene.
I do like the continuity that they're like, hey, you're the black lady, the black woman who cuts her arm off, I think, to escape that one trap, and I don't even know which one that was anymore, 4 or 5. They all kind of pun intended, bleed together past, I'd say, like 2 or 3. Then they're just like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, who knows? They're all the same deal. Before I ask one more question about the franchise, is there anything about the original Saw that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure we mentioned? I
don't think so. I mean, I'm really happy we did the puppet, and I can't believe that. Like,
it took a while to get to the puppet.
Yeah, I'm going to listen back to this and be like, what was I thinking? Like, come on. But no, I think we've touched on, all the important things about it and the puppet and Amanda. So, yeah, I think I'm happy.
Awesome. So my last question is about Spiral from the Book of Saw that apparently is supposed to come out, I think, obviously now because of the pandemic, got pushed to 2021. So we have Darren Lynn Bousman, who did 2, 3, and 4, coming back to direct for the first time, I think, since then. Chris Rock and Sam Jackson starring. Are you hopeful this is going to be a return to form? Do you think it's going to be another Jigsaw-esque cash grab? What are your thoughts on the studio trying to bring Saw back to its former glory?
I think, like, my expectations for it, I would like it to be almost like a spin-off. So not like in the same universe, because I think we've just had too much, we've spoken for like over an hour about the franchise, but I'm sure we could have spoken for more because there's just so much that happens, right? So, I would prefer them to almost go down like a, kind of like how you have the MCU and there's different like strands of the MCU. Right. I would almost like it to sort of do its own thing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because I saw the trailer for it and I was like, this doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look like the Saw that I know and love. So I guess that I would prefer to see a fresh take on it, if that makes sense.
Well, the thing is, do you want it to not connect to the other 8 movies, or you want it to be like completely like a reboot? Like, how would you want it to? Because the problem is that the other 8 movies, you have one original Jigsaw killer, and then everyone else just kind of continuing his work. So then the conundrum you end up in, if you're going to continue the franchise, is John Kramer's dead, so you either have another apprentice or a copycat. Which route would you prefer that Spiral takes?
I think copycat would be good, right? Because that's fresh. We've seen a lot of apprentices, and it wouldn't necessarily be good, but I would at least admire them for trying the copycat route, because I feel that that's at least different. And I think copycat killers, if they're written well, can be quite a compelling thing to watch. So I'd be open to watching that, certainly. But, like I say, I saw the trailer and I just thought, in terms of how it looked and the tone and the acting, it was very different to what we're used to. So I don't know. I want to like it. Like I take no joy in bashing things. It's just that we've seen so much of Saw now that it has to be something very different, I think, to impress me.
And the other movies got so, as we sort of mentioned, convoluted, and he was then planning things out like many years past when he was dead. He's like, I had this game lined up long before I was even I was put in this situation or whatever. And it's like a Jenga stack or something. It's like you can only pile that up so high before it comes crashing down. So I feel like I think you're right. I think the better thing is to just, all right, we'll just start a new story over here, and this will be chapter 1 of that story, not chapter 9, the other story from 20 years ago. You just run into that issue, and I think doing a copycat thing is probably a better route, because if you reboot it, then the hardcore fans will be complaining that, oh, you're just remaking it or whatever. And if you acknowledge that John Kramer existed, but now someone else is like, you know what? That's a good idea. I should teach some people some lessons and just kind of roll with it from there. I think that's probably the best way to go going forward. But I'm definitely curious to see. I'm definitely more curious to see Spiral than I was to see Jigsaw. Let's put it that way.
Me too. And I think I love Darren Lynn Bousman. I think he's really good. I love a weird musical he did years ago called Repo the Genetic Opera. That was a brilliant film. Loved that. And I think I trust him with it because his films that he directed in the Saw franchise I quite liked, versus other directors. And I think the Spiral sort of like tagline is something like from the Book of Saw. So I hope, like you said, it's going to go through an entirely different chapter and not an extension of the original. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it'd be a Saw cinematic universe starting now with Spiral.
Oh God.
So Lucy Buglass, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Yes, I can. So I'm mainly active on Twitter. So that's LGTH blog on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for bringing the Saw franchise to the table. This was a lot of fun to discuss and revisit. It almost makes me want to go back and watch 2 and 3 again. I haven't seen them in years. And I think the first 3 do function as a pretty solid horror trilogy. And then, it sort of goes off the deep end a little bit. But yeah, this was a good opportunity to go back and rewatch that, introduce my wife to the first one. And
I'm so sorry for your wife.
No, she actually enjoyed it. It stuck with her a little bit. The next morning, she was like, yeah, I was thinking about that movie because it has the psychological bent. Those are the ones that she finds interesting, but also the ones that disturb her more, just because they do get inside your heads in a way that a slasher movie wouldn't traditionally do. But no, she did generally enjoy the movie, so I'm glad I showed her at least this one, because for anybody listening and they haven't seen Saw, the first one, because of the air quotes torture porn reputation of the franchise, I do think this movie does not embody that at all, and I can recommend it as a kind of a classic horror, like a must-see in the vein of Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All of those franchises, this is definitely one that people that have avoided because of the reputation should give it a shot. At least the first one, and then incrementally from there, I guess, is sort of our advice.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and the beauty of the first Saw is you can just watch that and then be done with it.
Yeah, exactly.
It has a very good ending that you could just enjoy it and go, oh, that was a cool movie, and not watch the rest of them. So
yeah, no cliffhanger. That's what the other ones, everything is a cliffhanger pretty much when you get to the sequels. Everything's stringing along to the next mystery. But Lucy, this was a blast, and we will definitely have to bring you back on at some point.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Lucy.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.